Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. This week's show is brought to you by the Institute for the Study of Dad Jokes. Dads from around the world have been involved in cataloging and indexing the best dad jokes, and there's active staff there of dads and occasionally uncles and grandpas that go through these jokes and refine them and make sure they're disseminated to all dads everywhere. And they really need your support, because without that, we would end up with an absence of dad jokes, or just the same ones over and over again, which happens anyway. That's part of dad jokes. But we really need the continued study and cultivation of dad jokes. It's a pillar of our society. It's a pillar of parenting. And it's very important that dad jokes are available for all, not just dads, because not everybody has a dad. You know, it doesn't. It's not gender exclusive, but we need this form of humor in our society. So give them your support if you can. They're sponsoring today's show, which is with none other than a wonderful guy, and he's an expert in the field of dad jokes as well.
Indeed.
I'm sure he's familiar with the Institute, and he's the host of the What Magic Is This podcast, a magician, a scholar of magic, and he's making a face now, but I'm going to call him that because
unaccredited. I'll just put it that way. Unaccredited, like scholar, perhaps, but yeah.
I consider him a scholar, a gentleman, and a scholar. Welcome to the show, Douglas Batchelor.
Hello, hi. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't have any. I this is not a brag, but I literally have a high school education. I did not do well in post-secondary. I have this problem with people trying to tell me what to learn, because I'll just be like, I'll learn it myself. So yeah, I didn't do well. So when people say like scholar, I tend to think scholar is somebody who's gone to post-secondary, but truly it didn't used to be like that. Scholar was just somebody who just likes to read and study, truly. But
oh yeah, you could be a gentleman scholar, I guess.
Right. You know? Yeah, sure. I'll take that. Definitely. Thank you so much for having me here. This is awesome.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad you agreed to come on the show. I've been a fan of your show for quite a while.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like people play pretty fast and loose with the term scholar when it comes to the occult, because I don't think academically the occult has been something that's taken seriously. No. So historically speaking, anyway, I think that's beginning to change.
It is.
So I mean, sometimes I see people refer to themselves as an occult scholar, and I'm like, how do you qualify that?
Right.
But as far as you're concerned, in listening to your show, I mean, whether or not it's just being autodidactic, it's like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. So
I like to read, and I have this this curse somehow where a lot of what I read stays in my brain or stays in my memory, and so I'm able to conjure up lots of details. And I guess that in some way makes me a scholar, or perhaps even like a mutant of some kind. But when people are like, "Oh, you seem so smart," I'm like, I don't know if I'm smart. I don't know if it's to like sit me down and like try to debate if I do any good. But I just have a really good memory, and I read a lot, and that's truly it. Like that's all I can do for the most part. But yeah, it's something that I'm passionate about. And as far as talking about, going to school and things of that variety, if I'm not interested in what I'm learning, my brain doesn't want to know about it, right? And so that's why
Yeah.
things like magic and the occult and the esoteric and everything that I say at the beginning of my show, the weird, is interesting to me. That's how I'm able to retain it, because I love this stuff. This stuff is my lifeblood. I just think it's the most fascinating, most interesting stuff, and it just stays there.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that too. Just general enthusiasm will carry you very far. If
Yeah,
you want to know answers and you have a general idea of where to find them, just start down that road and start reading, you know. It's
definitely.
I feel
Yeah.
like I'm similarly cursed. Like for some reason, like dates and names and just like things I read and where I read them are just permanently embedded in my brain somewhere, and I could access it pretty much anytime I want. So
It's straight. I think a lot of people confuse intelligence for general knowledge and stuff like that. It's like just
oh yeah,
being good at Jeopardy makes you a genius. It's like, well, does it actually? I'm not too sure, but I've had the privilege of hanging out, with people who I would consider genius level. Like, holy smokes! Like the way that they're the way that they organize thoughts and are able to present them is like, I am in envy of that. Right? I don't know if I could ever be that. And perhaps one of the reasons that they are like that is because they went to post-secondary education and had to learn stuff that they didn't want to learn. So yeah, for the most part, I'm just one of those people that I I like things, and when I read about them, I tend to remember what I read.
yeah, yeah. Well, you're also very good at presenting the ideas on your show, and that's what
Yeah.
I appreciate because um, I don't I don't think people need to have a background uh, in occultism or magic to listen to your show and know what's going on. And I feel like
No.
a lot of magical podcasts kind of presume that you have a little bit of background there, and they can just take off running. So you're
I I hated the inside baseball. I'm not trying to talk down on anybody's podcast, but when I first started podcasting, I noticed there was a distinct lack of podcasts wherein if you didn't know what they were already talking about, you were completely lost, right? And so that was truly the ambition of the show, is to like, let's start as if nobody knows what I'm talking about when I start the episode, and then by the end of the episode they'll have a good idea of what it is we're talking about. For the most part, there's a couple of episodes that I still think are a little bit inside baseball, but for the most part, yeah, just trying to be gentle to people that are coming at this new, because it is kind of hard to wrap your head around if you're not familiar with this stuff. I mean, yourself and myself, I'm pretty sure we kind of grew up with this kind of thing. We probably had a lifelong interest, but there are people who are just discovering this stuff at the age of 35, at the age of
right.
45. Like that's and starting from zero is incredibly intimidating. So if they do listen to some podcasts where it is inside baseball, they're just going to be like, well, screw this. I don't care about any of this because I don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah, or without some of the background knowledge, get really wrong ideas about things, you know.
Sure,
So,
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, coming at this from more of like a Fortean angle, like I didn't always present myself as being 100% occult. You know,
Right.
I'm a generalist of the weird. You know, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
The
I've
the
I've
cult stuff definitely like throws a spanner into the kind of thing, because that separates me into. I'd love to just be like considered like a Fortean and stuff like that, because I love the work of Charles Fort, but my show mainly now, when people talk about the stuff that I do, it's like, oh, he's the magician guy that talks about other stuff as well, and it's like, oh, I kind of wish I started out a little bit more generalized, but uh,
yeah. Well, I mean, you did do a show on UFOs and one on ghosts, so I mean,
just recently though, I had to wait 5 years before even kind of like feeling okay with doing that, because
right,
I got a lot of feedback from people being like, I don't want you to talk about UFOs, or I don't want you to talk about ghosts because just everybody else is talking about that. I'll go to those podcasts. I don't want you to talk
right.
about them. Which is unfortunate, because that's why I'm here. Like my interest
Yeah,
in this stuff. That's why I have these books, and like that's why it's all interesting to me.
yeah. That was one thing I was going to ask you. Did it begin with the mysteries of Fortiana and
Yeah.
ghosts and stuff like that, and then we
Yeah.
go into magic? That was the way it worked for you.
Yeah. So I was incredibly fascinated by ghosts. I started by I said it in the episode I did about ghosts. It was Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters did it, right? And
Mm.
I had a lifelong interest. I remember the very first time when I was in like grade one, of course, loving Ghostbusters, but in grade one, there was a book that was in the little library in the display in October. So, school starts in September. The very next month is October. And around Halloween, in the library in our school, they had a display of Edna Barth's Witches, Pumpkins, and Grinning Ghosts. So I picked that up, and I could read before I was in school. So that was, amazing. And then I found out that the library had books on ghosts and ghost stories. So I take those out. It started with ghosts. Then from ghosts to, Bermuda Triangle to the Fortean stuff and what we call Fortean stuff, and then to UFOs, of course. But yeah, that started way before. Eventually finding the work of Colin Wilson,
Yeah.
those mysteries of those time life mysteries of the unknown, black, thin. There's like
Yeah.
40 of them. So good, right?
I have most of those still. Yeah.
Amazing. I have yet to meet somebody who's got every single one of them. And that just like that speaks to how, like how many of them that there are. Of course, unsolved mysteries. I only had 3 television stations growing up, but I do remember one of the programs they would show would be unsolved mysteries, right? Just like
Did you
everybody.
get sightings?
Sightings, didn't get sightings. No idea what that even is. It truly is. It is a TV show.
It was, and it was like Unsolved Mysteries, except it was all paranormal stuff all the time.
That would be
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah. No, unsolved mysteries didn't get. There were reruns. Leonard Nimoy did a show, didn't he?
In Search of.
In Search of. Didn't get that. Didn't get Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious Universe or whatever that one was. Just Unsolved Mysteries, which was great because it covers murders and missing people and ghosts and UFOs and everything. So
Right. Yeah. Robert Stack walking out of the mist and
so good. There's a genius. Kids today, right? Kids today will not understand the trauma that
Right.
these shows put on us. It's like, oh, I'll be abducted at any point because it happened on Unsolved Mysteries.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that archetype needs to come back, is like the mystery man as a narrator stepping out of the mist. Like, we don't have that anymore.
We
Like, I think
have a trench coat that creates its own fog. You can put anything under a trench
Right.
coat, truly. Like a little fog machine, get it in there. Just make sure it's quiet, because if it's really loud, then people will know that you're producing your own fog.
Yeah, I think Rod Serling and Robert Stack occupied the same kind of symbol in my head as a kid, where it was just an omniscient narrator, kind of, just appearing, and talking to you.
I was late to the Serling game, and it's unfortunate because I didn't have more than 3 television channels until I was like 16, when a Brazilian moved into our house for a year, and because it was the World Cup, we had to get one of those like Dish Network things.
Yeah.
so he could watch soccer. Truly, I'm not joking. So at the age of like 15 or 16, I finally got more than 3 television channels, and there was a sci-fi channel in Canada. It wasn't sci-fi, it was called Space. It was literally called Space, and they would replay Twilight Zone, and that was the greatest shit ever. I wish I had Twilight Zone when I was even younger than 16 and 17. It, to this day, about a year ago, I rewatched quite a few Twilight Zone episodes. Genius. Like kids again will never understand. Just Serling died so young. I just wish less cigarettes. As cool as it looks when you're holding that cigarette, Rod, I wish you smoked less of them, man. Like I know it's cool.
Yeah.
Man, I wish you were still around. I wish we had Rod through more of the 90s and maybe the early aughts, but yeah.
I could do a show entirely on like the best Twilight Zone episodes, and it's an obsession of mine, and I was fortunate enough to be able to watch it like as a small kid. New Year's Eve every year, there was one station that would just play a marathon of Twilight Zone.
Awesome.
And another station that would just do a marathon of Three Stooges. So I'd just go back and forth between the two.
Hey man, I was obsessed with the Three Stooges for a time. I had VHS cassettes of the Three Stooges. Great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody who says the Three Stooges are stupid, come on, everybody. They're
yeah.
genius. The
You
hardest
don't
work.
need that negativity in your life. If
Exactly.
somebody's telling
Exactly.
you that.
Get rid of them. Throw a hammer at their head. No, don't. It's not. It doesn't go like it does in those shows. It'll actually hurt them. Yeah.
I learned that the hard way as a kid. So, yeah, well, you got the X Files right when you were younger.
Did. Yeah. Loved the X Files. That was one of those shows where initially, some of the early episodes were actually like really scary. Like seasons
Yeah.
one,
Oh
season
yeah.
two, there were things. And so I was quite young. I think, yeah, like 13 when it first came out, 12, 13. Yeah. Brutal. But again, like by the time that came out, I'd already had like the Unsolved Mysteries kind of primed me. So I kind of knew already what they were talking about. It was just such a fun trip. Like X Files, so good. It's just
Yeah. You and I must be just about the same age because I feel like I had the same track record.
32. Yes, we're both 32
We're
years old.
both we're both hip young
That's
30s.
right. That's right. That's right. I'm sitting here. People can't see. I'm sitting in like a polo shirt that when people see me in this, or sorry, a rugby shirt. When people see me in it, they're like, "Oh, Harry Potter." And it's like, no, not really. Just striped shirt, horizontal stripes on my shirt. Yeah, I'm definitely hip. I'm very cool.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing a tie on a Saturday morning sitting in my
Nice.
house. But
You gotta show up. Hey, at least I'm not wearing. A lot of times, I wear my own T-shirts that I have from my store. I'm my best customer. I've bought over 15 of my own shirts, and sometimes I'll just wear them when I interview people. And then I
well,
feel halfway through the interview, I'll be like, "This is kind of dumb." The guy who wears his own shirt while he's interviewing something, in case they like forget what show they're on, I'll just
yeah,
leave
right.
and be like, here's the show. But today I went with rugby shirt.
All right, wonderful. Yeah. Um, well, geez, now I've fallen off my train of thought
I'm so
talking
sorry.
about
I have
what
this
we're.
effect. I have this effect.
Oh, yeah, about kind of being around the same age, and it's convenient that we're talking about this because what I really wanted to have you on for to talk to you about, because I feel like we're probably on a similar wavelength with this, is the intersection of magic and fiction in culture and how these two things tend to inform each other was
Mhm.
kind of the broad topic I wanted to have you on about originally. And then
Sure.
things went haywire in this country and I had to, I got a little bit less organized than normal, but
Oh, it's totally fine. No, this is indeed an area which is an important one, particularly for people that are new to getting into magic, because um, I'll just start talking about this and we'll see
sure.
where we align. But a lot of things when you start getting involved in magic come from a mythological basis, right? So a lot of things that we're going to be interacting with are stories, particularly we'll talk about Greek myths, we'll talk about Egyptian mythology and things of this variety. And people, for the most part, when they interact, when they see that, they're like, okay, cool, I understand those. But then as you get further on, you start to look at things which aren't myths and could be from a more fictional basis. We before the mics got turned on, we were talking about H.P. Lovecraft, and there are people who will interact with certain entities that Lovecraft wrote about as works of fiction. And so when people get involved into the occult, they get like, well, whoa, whoa, wait. Those don't have the same tenure as say things like those ancient Greek myths. Does that mean you're just making it all up? And we have a real hard problem, particularly here in the West, with the ideas of imagination and what make believe is and
Mhm.
fantasy. We think it's a binary. We think that it's either true or false and that they never at any point intersect. So a lot of people, again, when they get involved with magic, will like, well, then if that stuff is made up, then it must all be made up. And for the most
Right.
part, I find a lot of people who are initially very excited about magic they at some point hit this moment, and it's a bit of a car crash. And a lot of them, I'd say the vast majority of them, I don't have stats, obviously, but a vast majority of them, when this car crash occurs, um, they just move on to other things. It's a proximity infatuation, 2 to 3 years for the most part, and then magic just becomes, oh, it's that thing. And then it was something I was interested in for a little bit, and then, you know, it doesn't impact the price of bread. I'm just not going to concern myself with it. When in fact, it should be like one of the most interesting aspects of magic in the occult, because we see manifestations of it. Artists and people that do this kind of creative act and things of this variety, what occurs often, and people are now starting to write about it, is that people will literally be haunted by the things that they've created fictionally. How does that work? Where on the binary are you in that case? If something you've written about and created in your mind decides to show up and is as real to you as we are talking right now, how does this idea of make believe occur? And yeah, it's unfortunate that we're so ill equipped in this day and age, and not a lot of people are talking about it either. This idea of that just because something is fiction or created doesn't mean it's not real. Fictions can be very real, and sometimes scarily so.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I guess we are very much aligned.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It would just like I get asked questions by people all the time, because I ask people to write to me on the podcast, and a lot of people being like, "Well, I'll use this as an example. There's this book called The Three Books of Occult Philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. And inside it is just this, like, it is the book that everybody needs to know for quote unquote Western magic, right? And everybody treats these three books as like an authority on the occult and magic. And then a bit later on, there was this book called The Fourth Book of Occult Philosophy, right? And nobody knows who put it together. Nobody knows who wrote it. And so I get people being like, oh, I'm going to use this stuff from the three books. And I was like, well, maybe you should look at the fourth book of occult philosophy, because it's a bit more practical. And people will be like, well, that wasn't written by Agrippa, so it doesn't have any kind of, it's not real. And I go, no, it actually has really practical, functional aspects in it that I think in some ways are even more easy to grapple with for somebody beginning in magic than something as all encompassing as the three books of occult philosophy. But immediately in our mind, we just have this thought that because in the West we like to have authorities and experts and things of this variety, that when something is not aligning with those kind of prejudices that we have already, then that means that it can't be true. And that is really unfortunate, because I say, and I don't get flack for it, but I actually think that the fourth book of occult philosophy is awesome. I think it's incredible. It's got stuff to start yourself doing really weird kinds of magic in there, whereas the three books of occult philosophy is more philosophic than useful. It's just it's also huge,
it's in the abstract. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost, for the people that had it would use it more for rhetorical purposes and philosophic purposes than practical ones. But yeah, we just have this idea that because something doesn't comes from a place that we can't source it immediately, then that means that it's less useful and it's less good and less quote unquote real. And as far as this thing that the rest of society and the Western world considers to be not real at all. At this day and age, people, when they find out that I talk about this kind of stuff, most people think that I'm kind of crazy or like stupid.
Right.
Like
Or
what?
naive.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
why do you think this stuff is like, do you actually think this stuff is real? And I say, yeah, I do. I've seen it. I've seen it work many times in my life. I've for all intents and purposes, I've conjured your idea of a ghost that you have in your head right now. I've conjured one of those things. Something appeared to me by doing this stuff. Where does like that's so bizarre. I believe it's real. So yeah.
Well, I mean, belief is one thing. I mean, that's the problem, is that in order to address these things, all of these various things, you end up by necessity becoming a bit pedantic, because then you want to define every term. Like belief is one thing, knowledge is another, and truth is quite another. These are all very slippery concepts. And I think what you're describing with the car crash element to this, it's similar to in paranormal events, the boggle factor.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of it's sort of a barrier to entry for learning in magic. Like I don't think things are occulted on purpose. Like these things aren't kept secret because they're dangerous to know, and people are purposely keeping them secret. I think the truth is so absurd that
Mm.
that provides enough of a barrier to cover over the, to occult it and make it secret. You have to take a leap of faith with some of this stuff and not discard it too harshly.
Yeah, I also think that one of the things that is interesting, particularly when one engages in this kind of thing, is if you ever hang out with people and they describe, when paranormal things that happen to them, usually their stories are pretty boring, which leads me to believe that these experiences of high weirdness or things that have that boggle factor to them, that they're highly personal. That there is something about the person that is doing it, which or that is engaging in it, that it just seems so mundane to other people when you're trying to describe it, as incredible as they are. And I try to treat them as being, they're in that Jeffrey Kripal-esque, they're super normal in the sense that they're super and incredible and just so bizarre and so weird, but almost all of us in some way have had something kind of like this happen. And then when we try to describe it to other people, it's just kind of like, okay, moving on. Like when people describe their dreams to you, there's nothing that will draw a conversation to a close and be like, oh, I had this funny dream the other day. Let me tell you about it. And everybody just rolls their eyes into the back of
Yeah.
their head. It just leads me to believe that this stuff is highly personalized and highly, highly individualized, particularly. And in that, I believe also is why a lot of people, when they start to engage in works of creativity and in fiction, so much so that it becomes an active participant in their life. Again, that leads me to believe that this element of make belief that is considered, part of that binary where people think that, well, because one aspect of it is created and fictional, quote unquote fictional, then that means every aspect of it is not true. We're dealing with stuff that needs to be on a spectrum as opposed to true binary back and forth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I also that the act of creation and artistic endeavor is itself a magical act. And by definition, the magic is creating something and manifesting things that then become real. They become the truth.
Yeah. One of my favorite books, and I mentioned it in my UFO episode, is called Report on Communion. I forget the name of the author, but
Oh,
he
I'm
was,
familiar with it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like as fun as Communion is by Whitley Strieber, this book is almost more fun because the guy's just going through all of the claims that Whitley makes in his book Communion. For everybody who doesn't know, I hope they would. I hope anybody listening to your show knows what Communion is. But for those who don't know, this gentleman had a series of really strange encounters, and he wrote about them in a book in the late '80s called Communion. The cover has this image of a gray alien that traumatized everybody, myself included, because it's just such a striking image. But
Yeah.
then a journalist decided to go through all of the claims in that Whitley made in that book, and crazy stuff started happening to him, like black helicopters and like all of the stuff that like all of the weird things started occurring to just somebody looking into somebody else's, according to many people, work of fiction. A lot of people still think that Whitley made every aspect of that book up. That's all part from his imagining. He was an author before he wrote this autobiographical book, Communion. So therefore, he's
Right.
making it all up, right?
A fiction author to
A
be
fiction author,
specific.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And so the guy who made the stuff up had somebody else go off of the stuff that guy supposedly made up and had crazy stuff happening to him. What's going on? Like where are we on this binary then? If this other person, just by looking into this supposed act of fiction is having stuff happen. It's incredible. It's
It is,
it's
and it's mind warping, and that's why when I did a presentation for the Anomicon virtual conference a couple of years ago, and that was my whole thing is like, even just by being interested in this stuff, I mean, we can think of having a paranormal encounter as being a form of initiation,
Mhm.
but you can also self-initiate just by looking into this stuff and starting to trace it and starting to figure out what's happening. Because you look at something like synchronicity, that's a great example of what you were referring to before, where it's highly personalized and it's going to be profoundly important to you and impactful for you personally. And then if you try to explain it to somebody, you're going to sound like a lunatic.
Yeah. That's part of the admission to this weird ride is, again, there's a lot of people that come to this and then they'll be interested in it for like 2 to 3 years and then they'll move on to something else. But one of the reasons I try to steer people is, as fun as ritual magic is, and it is fun. I do advise people look into things like near death experiences, look into things like UFOs, look into things like ghosts, because also, or cryptids, whatever you want. Like actually go to haunted houses, like not obviously like
Yeah.
break it, but like actually just go there. A lot of these places are in places that are like tourist attractions, truly, but just start to involve yourself in the weird, because once you do that, it really affects like thing. When you go in expecting weird things happen, of course skeptics are going to say that you're manifesting. This is just, you want something to happen so bad that it's going to happen. Yeah, that's what's going on, truly. And there's something to that, right? Like, I don't see that you explaining what's going on discounts it. And we're just so chock full of that kind of real shithead skepticism these days, where we do so poorly with that binary of what's real and what's fake. If you ever watch people going into trance, particularly in things like ATRs or African traditional religions, or things of that
Oh,
variety.
I've been there personally for it,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
like a voodoo ritual and seeing people get possessed. Like, yeah,
When they start out, it looks like they're faking it. It looks like they're doing something that's make believe. And then
right,
it's very not, and then something happens where it's very not make believe, right? so,
yeah,
so, like, okay, so this kind of, and I find other cultures are much better at this, at seeing it as a spectrum of creation and acting and performance, eventually leading to very, very real phenomena.
yeah. I mean, one of my personal quests is using comedy toward that end.
Comedy.
Joke telling, pratfalls, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
not? It could work.
Well, I remember one of the things that a lot of occultists have a problem with is this is the 19th century spiritualism, particularly because
Yeah.
the Golden Dawn and Crowley told them that they were all fakers and they all made it up, and it got a bad rap. But people would talk about, if you look through the records of people who were skeptical of that shit back in the time. Sorry, I swear. I don't know if I'm allowed swearing, but I just did.
Oh, that's fine. Yep.
Perfect. There are people aren't dumb, right? Like people that were smart back then would be considered smart now. And a lot of people were skeptical about this stuff when it happened. And so they would go to these seances expecting for everything to be weird and everything to be fake. And then they would a lot of times report very obviously made up, very obviously this. And then this thing happened and it shocked me. I have no idea how that happened.
Hmm.
But a lot of times, to go to what you initially said, a lot of times it would be so playful and like the stuff that they saw was made up. Like is this an is this a comedy act? Is like is this
Right.
something stupid? Like it's and I forget her first name. Anita Palladino. A lot of people, if you can find these skeptics notes, and they would say like she was over the top, like almost like in a Dame Edna kind of way, like
Right.
over the top weird and telling jokes and making really sexy comments and stuff, like, which would shock the the people at the
Right.
like, but it was part of what she was doing. Like she was so herself, and that it was part of, I think, some kind of the lubricant to make the magic happen, like truly it's, I think there's really something to that.
Yeah, and she's a particularly fascinating case. I've written about her before, Eusapia
Enormously.
Palladino.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh,
Sylvia. First name Sylvia.
Eusapia,
Giuseppe. Yes. Part of it.
yes. It's an Italian name, I guess. She was an
Yes.
Italian,
Yeah.
kind of lower class Italian middle-aged woman that
Yeah.
had these amazing powers, apparently. But she would sit with scientists, like
Yes.
um, well, the Curies, I think.
Mhm.
The Curies investigated her.
That's right.
Henri Bergson sat with her at one point,
Really? I didn't know that. Really?
and he was the brother-in-law of S.L. McGregor Mathers.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a connection there.
Yep.
Uh, and then what I focused on was Cesare Lombroso,
Okay.
was one of the people that sat with her, because he's considered kind of the father of criminology,
Okay.
which has a corollary to things like oh crap, I'm gonna forget the term for it now. Using the shape of the skull to determine propensity for criminal acts.
Phrenology.
Phrenology, yeah, it's adjacent to phrenology. What he was really talking about was a kind of reverse evolution, like a de-evolution. So like criminals were kind of less than human in a way, right?
Oh, of course. Because yes,
And
rich, rich people never commit crimes.
but he was a great scientific mind of his time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a lot of his ideas are incredibly problematic by today's standards and don't hold any scientific water.
Yeah, they are.
But he was very convinced by Palladino,
yeah.
which led him to be very interested in spiritualism, which
Mhm.
ended up discrediting him with the scientific community toward the end of his life. They thought he was a doddering old man who just lost his marbles. He used to be brilliant, and nowadays it's kind of like, oh, he was kind of a nut before, but then he was kind of seeing the light toward the end.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be the other way around.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah,
I
but
hate how people use the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle was so interested in spiritualism as like, well, he was great when he was writing, Sherlock Holmes, like perhaps the most important fictional character in the English language besides, I don't know, Hamlet,
right,
or Batman,
or Dracula.
or Dracula, right? And
Yeah,
but then spiritualism, and it's like, no, that is the most awesome part of his story. Like that makes me love him even more. But yeah, we again, because we have this hard problem with stuff that is considered hooey and more spectrum based as far as experience is concerned. When one aspect of it is viewed as being fake, then that ruins every aspect of it. And so we're ignoring a lot of people who were really brilliant, really
yeah.
brilliant. Yes, problematic with their ideas, but they were very smart at their time. They were going for this stuff and writing about this stuff. And now just barely mentioned. My girlfriend at one point was talking to one of her colleagues, about my podcast, and uh, out of chance they looked it up and they saw that I did an episode on spiritualism. And the first thing that people say, oh, isn't that all crap? Like that's just, oh, it's because Houdini, it's all crap. It's like Houdini really wanted to believe, and yeah,
Yeah, people miss that.
yeah. He was because James Randi also, I'm sorry, I'm just throwing out a lot of names, because James Randi did such a poor job of his skepticism. We just think that that's what a skeptic is now, right? Somebody who's just like mean and like horrible and kind of a blowhard. That's, oh, Houdini was just that. Houdini was just James Randi. It's like, no, Houdini probably would have hated James Randi. Like he probably would have found him like a really uninteresting, unintellectual person. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just in the fact
No,
that
I mean you're speaking my language right now,
because one part of something is fake doesn't mean that every aspect of it is. In fact, that one thing that is problematic is, in many cases, a huge key to the phenomena itself. Truly, and we miss that when we approach things with such pedantic, nitpicky details. When we look at the part of it that is quote unquote fictional, quote unquote unreal, unmaterialistic, that actually might be one of the most important aspects to these phenomena. And it's really sad.
Right. And I've long thought that the stuff that beggars belief the most is the most worth uh, just giving the benefit of a doubt to. Just
Yeah.
like, let's just assume for our purposes right now that Jeff the Talking Mongoose was a very real thing. You know, because that's a good place to start. If that's possible, what else
Yeah.
is possible?
Right.
You
Right.
open a wider range of possibilities. So,
Definitely.
but to your point, I think it was J. Allen Hynek that said that ridicule is not part of the scientific method, and the public should not be taught that it is. Which really gets to your point. Like, we shouldn't be, as a skeptic, you shouldn't be ridiculing people
Yes.
and acting like they're stupid for believing stuff, especially
Yeah.
stuff that's based on experiential phenomena, the stuff they've actually experienced. You know, um, uh,
A lot of times we have this idea, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, AP, but we have this idea that people have these experiences and talk about them for very selfish reasons. They want they want attention, or they're dissatisfied with their personal life and blah blah. And again, that's part of it. A lot of times these experiences are highly traumatic, right? Like
they can be, yeah.
yeah, they stick out, and it's like, why would anybody wish this? It's that whole argument that like gay people choose to be gay. It's like, who would choose in this day and age to have that? A lot of these experiences, and I know that's a really flimsy comparison, but I only make it but for the fact that, yeah, a lot of times, particularly for the people who initially were skeptical a lot of times and have this stuff happen, the kind of people that go up to Jeffrey Kripal after he does a presentation, who have 5 PhDs, have written 20 books, they approach him afterwards and they're like, I had something really awful and weird happen to me, and it kind of threw a lot of what I do amiss.
Yeah.
And I don't know who to talk to about this, but I just want you to know that by giving space to the experiencers, you were doing a good thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there this is coming up. This is part of a thing, and I'm actually really glad that it is, that we're giving space for the experience and the experiencers itself. Doesn't mean we have to believe everything they say, right? But again, we're trying to work with spectrums as opposed to, is it all true or is it all false?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One way to look at it is dimensions. Like, there's dimensions to these things. If you
Mhm.
look at it from one angle, it appears a certain way, and if you look at it from another angle, and also that two things can simultaneously be true, even if they seem paradoxical. You know, like,
One of my favorite things that Jeffrey Kripal said is that truth is relative, not because there's no such thing as truth. It's because that there's just so much truth. And truth
right?
is one thing. Truth means a lot of things. If you talk to people whose cosmologies and the way that they look at the world is vastly different to yours, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. Like, it just means that it's different, and their truth is truly something that their cosmology has made space for. And we just, because rational enlightenment thinking, which is a great thing. I'm glad we have modern medicine. I'm glad we have cell phones. I'm glad we have all of these things, but we have bulldozed a great deal of like the idea of epistemology. We have completely bulldozed with rationalist, logical, positivist thinking. And it's I, like Jeffrey Kripal, think that, this is kind of the thing that's really problematic in this day and age, as far as like our survival on this planet. We're doing a
Oh, I
really
agree.
we're doing a really bad job of being caretakers of this cosmos. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's perhaps an understatement, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that materialism and science and what can be physically proven doesn't have all of the answers, or rather, um, a better way to look at it, because I think people become antagonistic towards science when they enjoy the paranormal or the magical to the point where they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there can be a healthy balance there, right? And I think if you're reducing your worldview to what can be physically proven, you're actually restraining yourself from the wide variety of possibilities, what's possible. If you refuse to imagine beyond what can be proven now, um, then you're not likely to manifest new possible dimensions of reality, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think
I,
I was talked about this in a recent episode just with science fiction. Like a lot of things that used to be science fiction later became reality. And one wonders if the inspiration was there, or maybe, maybe there's a magical element to that where it's brought into being from like an idea realm, magically into reality. Who knows?
yeah, a lot of people talk about the obvious example is Star Trek. You know
Yeah.
how everything, everything that Star Trek wants, the gadgets and things like that, we have those now. And while I think there is something truly to that, part of the thing that made them appealing is, I think, one of the reasons that they're so inspiring for us is like, and we're all gonna try and get this thing that we have. There is this wonderful dance, indeed, between science and innovation and and creation, truly. And yeah, I do agree with you that you just because science does you dirty as far as your belief systems, it doesn't mean that it's all awful, right? Again, you do not want to throw that baby out with the bathwater. It's, as far as one of the reasons we're living as long as we do, and that we're as healthy as we are is mainly due to the enlightenist rationalist way in which we're seeing the world right now. But I'll also say you're entirely correct in this in the dictum that you can experience things outside of that way of arriving at truth. It's about truth validation, truly. And this is what goes to this idea of epistemology, which is something I try to hammer home in my podcast. It's like, how do we arrive at what is truth, and how do we have our philosophies? And that's just epistemology. It's like, what led you to this? What led a society or to culture, or you specifically, to your worldviews is as much, if not the most important part of your story, and how you synthesize these kinds of weird experiences or just your day-to-day life, right? And so that's something that I think a lot of people don't don't really understand. I have a lot of people come to me that are starting out in magic, and they start to do magic with the same kind of materialist way of seeing the world that they have, or that was, I would argue that it's drilled into people. I think if left to their own devices, kids and teenagers would want to hold on to a world in which an imagination plays a huge part of their existence. But our school system and the adults that we surround ourselves with really want us to be like, no, you have to know about the real world. You have to know about these kind of things. But I have a lot of people come to me that want they want the things to happen in their life magically. They want the magic to happen, but they're not going to go out of their way to do like the rituals or stuff. They're just waiting for that experience that brings them to
Mm.
the other side. And that is quite rare as much as I said, like, the super normal or the supernatural is indeed a natural thing, and a lot of people do have crazy experiences at some point in their life. Waiting around for it to happen is usually never the best way of going about it. But yeah, I do have a lot of people that they come in with their mindset, and they're like, I want to know about magic, but I'm just going to wait for it to happen. I'm going to put a statue up over there, and I'm just going to wait for something weird to happen. And it's like, I don't think you got to go there. I think there's some kind of way in which you have to change part of what you're doing in order to be able to allow for magic to come in. And again, that's that dalliance with and that dance with what is real and what is fake, and what is make believe, and what is not. That was called that kind of experience occurring was called, back in the day, was called initiation. There's a
Right.
lot of people using the term initiation now for something that you're never going to fail. Like what what's an initiation that you're not scared of, or that doesn't make you question everything about what has happened to you, right? And
Hmm.
We're missing a ton of that these days. And I don't think that the answer to that is that we have to bring back these Greek mystery schools or things of that variety. For
Yeah.
the most part, just doing magic truly is what I want people to do, to actually see how weird our world is. That when you do start to engage in this stuff, weird things will happen.
Mhm.
And one of the major reasons I tell people to go into dreams is that your dreams are prophetic. You can see the future in your dreams. Cool, crazy. It's when you finally pay attention to them and it actually occurs, then you have to go, all right, well, if that's true, this entire way that we view time and space is a house of cards. And then
Yeah.
it's always my earnest hope that from there people can be like, make the leap to be like, well, if that's something, then a lot of this other stuff that these people are talking about, quote unquote, magic or the occult, there might be something else to that. And that's always been one of my main ambitions. But
Well,
yeah,
thinking about time, if you have really, I mean, if you have space for it, think about time,
yeah,
because I mean, you do need like a lot of daydreaming time in your day to day life to really think about this stuff. But that was what fascinated me as a kid,
yeah,
and I'm always having new insights about the nonlinearity of time and how like time. I always thought Einstein said that time is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. You
right.
know, and when you think about it like that, like um, yeah, how does prophecy work? How do omens really work? How does divination work? And all of this other stuff. Can you change it? When you start getting into these questions, it's almost like you're opening up those possibilities. You're opening up neural pathways in your brain, literally, but also magical pathways and portals to other broad vistas from which to imagine a better future. You know,
Def-
so,
yeah, definitely.
because to your point with Star Trek, yeah, we have the gadgets. We have a lot of the gadgets. We
Yeah,
have smartphones now that can do more than Mr. Spock's tricorder could. You
right.
know, I'm talking to you via Zoom, which is a lot like talking to another ship on the bridge. What we
Exactly.
don't have now is a crew with like a Russian dude and a Scottish guy and an alien from another planet and a woman that was born and raised in Africa as an officer on the bridge of a ship. We don't have that.
No.
So that's where I'd like to get to. Infinite combinations,
Yeah.
and infinite diversity.
Yeah, yeah. We've always been here in the West. We've always been fascinated with the trinkets, as opposed to the worldview that gets to a society that has those things, right? Like you, I would wish the reverse as well. Let's have world peace and understanding before we're able to literally teleport. Like
Oh yeah,
I would like to have the good bits as far as understanding others and holding space for other viewpoints first before we
right.
teleport elsewhere.
Yeah,
That's just me. That's just I'm a
because
weirdo.
we may not make it far enough
Right,
along in
right.
as a society, and if
What
we
good
didn't
is a
spend so much.
replicator? What good is a replicator if you can't, if you can't have world peace? I like really, truly.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing that people will think you're naive for, and in hoping for that, and I think that's ridiculous. Like world peace should be not just a silly thing that idealists want. It should be a possibility, and it should be a reality. Like we would be on Mars by now if the entire world was working together. Like
But we're also in a strange spot as well, AP, with this idea though, because people will make the argument that by belief in weird stuff and religion and spirituality is the stuff that holds us back. That's the stuff that everybody's fighting over. And while there is a point to that, I think that it's at base, it's a lot of it has to do with human behavior and prejudices. And I truly do think that there is a possibility that we can get over like a lot of these things. But I don't think it happens by getting rid of religion and getting rid of spirituality. I think that that is in part what we were talking about before, that little bit, that thing that is viewed as being the poison in the system might actually be its salvation. And I truly believe this. I truly think that we've lost something very important in the way that we used to interact with each other in the world that we're in, that can help us get to that point where
Yeah.
let's not even do world peace. Let's as a this again is just seems so started. Let's start with giving every human being on this planet clean drinking water. Shouldn't be difficult. Shouldn't be
Right.
hard, right? Like no matter where you
Let's
are,
start with yeah. Let's start with
clean,
human dignity, basic common decency,
right?
and
Let's start with
kindness.
it. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah. I hear you.
I may be a dreamer. Like, here's the thing. Like for me, and this is good. I might accrue some ire with this. Listening to the lyrics of John Lennon's "Imagine" some in this day and age, like myself, it's kind of terrifying. It's like like a lot of the things he
Right.
says get rid of. I'm like, no, 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 no. We should hang on to that. I should play that song at Christmas as opposed to whenever, or sorry, at Halloween as opposed to Christmas, because some of the things he does talk about, I do think are kind of scary.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about that one, John.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't agree with John Lennon about everything, but your analogy about the bit of poison in the system is perhaps an apt one because we don't have antidotes without first having a poison. And as
Right?
Paracelsus said, if it was indeed him that said it,
Yeah,
the dose is the poison. You know?
correct. Yep, yep, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think the abolition of what we can call subjective worldviews or spirituality gets us closer to any kind of utopia. And of course, we can argue back and forth about this idea of utopianism and things of that. But it, I think that things can truly get better with a deeper, fuller, more rounder understanding of how important the subjective worldview is in our
Mhm.
lives. There is an enormous lack of meaning in a lot of people's lives that I find frankly terrifying. People fill it with other things,
Mhm.
and a lot of times it's not being filled with things that we would consider worthy. Um, we we are we can just go to this idea that we are meaning making machines, and I don't like that term. I just think that we used to be better at apprehending this world in a way that inspires us to do things like create fiction that later becomes real and stuff of this variety.
Mhm.
We used to be better at this kind of stuff. And while some would say that I'm looking back with rose-colored glasses, I don't think I am. I think there is a general thing that we in the West have gotten rid of since the Industrial Revolution that is
Yeah,
necessary to
exactly.
our survival on a day-to-day basis. And the idea that by getting rid of this subjective world that each one of us carries is horrifying to me.
Yeah.
It's the most important bit. Again, it's that it's that corrosive element that everybody's wishing to stamp out that I think is the thing that we need to concentrate on to help us. I think it's there, and more people are. I mean, my show is very popular for a show on stuff that the rest of the world thinks is absolute bullshit. Um,
Right.
I'm not going to list names of people who have reached out to me to like very interesting people have reached out to me saying I like your podcast, and I'm like, what? Like, why are you listening to my show? Um,
Right. Yeah.
weird. But people are realizing that there is something very much missing from our day to day that was important, and it can't just be the hustle of living, to live in a house and have those three needs met, those three basic needs met. There's something else that we need to look into a bit more.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the Industrial Revolution, and that era is so important to look at because what they were talking about was the abolition of magic and
yeah.
superstition, and these are all things of the past that need to be stamped out. And we need to build factories and fill the air with smog from coal burning and production and like look where that got us. Like not great. It's not great. And I'm not
As a,
saying that our modern comforts are a bad thing or by necessity evil, but you need a healthy balance of these things. You know, you need the enchantment in
yeah,
order to have the glamour. You know,
yeah. It's
so
a weird thing where it was one of these ideas I had for a book, and maybe by saying this, somebody will go out and write it. And if they do, by all means, go for it. But I've done a lot of thinking about witch persecution in Scotland specifically, and the Industrial Revolution, for the most part, was really spearheaded by Scottish people. It was one of the poorest areas of Europe. It gave us probably the biggest leap forward as far as being able to live longer, healthier. The world that we live in right now was started by one of the poorest parts of Europe. Uh, but before that, there were these incredible ideas of creating a a pure Christian society, a
mhm,
Protestant pure Christian society, and along with that came these awful persecutions of witches. The numbers are staggering as far as like people that were people that were accused and people that were prosecuted, a lot of times executed in Scotland. As far as percentages, larger than other places like Germany, and that the idea for that perfect Christian world that had those witch persecutions was the same one that gave us the Industrial Revolution. It's not that the links are tenuous. I think that it's so easy to see the worldview go to the Industrial Revolution that I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. And for me, that's eminently fascinating. That is just because for one, also my name is Douglas, which might be like one of the most Scottish names. These are my ancestors, right? Like these are the people. When I grow a beard, it's red. Truly, like when it gets longer, it's red. Um, this is the kind of thing that is in some way like my blood. This worldview that was so willing to punish people for believing different things, and a lot of times it wasn't. A lot of times it was just accusations for people that they didn't like. Within 100 years, started us to the world that we live in now. I think is something that is incredibly fascinating. I don't know where I'm going with this. I just
no,
want
I
to.
think that's fascinating too, and I hope you do write
Nobody.
that book because I'll
No,
read it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. I recently did an episode for folks on my Patreon, that I don't prescribe much for people that get into magic to begin with. I don't. There's not a book that I say everybody needs to read this book. Everybody needs to do this thing. Everybody needs to, because magic is such a personal journey for everybody. To find your way is truly to create your own path, which is where when you're following other people's paths, or you're doing Golden Dawn, or you're doing Aleister Crowley's stuff, or you're doing all this kind of stuff, while it might work for you and you might find a place in it, I truly think that if for you to survive that 2 to 3 year infatuation, you truly have to go and find your own things. And so I try not to prescribe stuff. But one thing I have recently said to all of the people that are on Patreon is that give yourself 3 months to look at witchcraft persecutions, because you will learn not only a lot about beliefs and how we have beliefs, but about societies and this Western world in which we live, besides just the numbers and the kinds of atrocities that were committed. The witch trials in the early modern period in Europe is something that if people listening to this have not looked into it, devote some time to looking into it. It's incredible what you can learn and what you can read between the lines, particularly from scholars who write books about them. Brian Levac is a very great scholar who's written a lot about witchcraft persecutions. Um, I don't prescribe a lot, but a lot of where we are right now as a culture and as a people within the West specifically, there's no better way of looking at things, and not in like a negative way, because you also start to realize, just like how important belief is for groups of people, by looking at the witch trials. It's fascinating. Also, people creating their own fictions, and fictions later becoming real in some sense, like that. All of that stuff could be couched within the witch trials of the early modern period in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think in the United States, people concentrate on the witch trials at like Salem,
Yeah,
Massachusetts.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but the early modern period in England, Scotland, France, throughout
Germany,
Europe, yeah, Germany
Germany,
was bad.
Germany is Germany's
Well,
incredible.
that's where the Malleus Maleficarum came from, was the
They
German Inquisition, right?
they had basically what we could consider like torture factories for witches, like
Yeah,
structures that they could move from town to town. Like it, it's mind-boggling in this day and age to think about it. But Germany put it on a different level. The thing that I think about mostly because by proxy, my family's Scottish. In not by proxy, my family is Scottish. They're from Helensburgh in Scotland. That I tend to concentrate with that, but also that the numbers are so interesting. The numbers for persecution to execution are high. They're in the 90s, like from the
yeah.
information that we have, and we don't have a lot of the stats. Like people being accused to people being executed, 90%. That's incredible. Those numbers don't exist anywhere else in Europe. And it's like, well, why? What was happening there? But it was this creation. It was this idea of creating a perfect world, which a lot of people are
Mhm.
trying to do these days. Like a lot of people, you know, not just politicians, but just a lot of thinking right now is solutionism, and that every problem deserves a solution that will bring us to a time and a place wherein we don't have these silly beliefs of spirits and ghosts and UFOs, but that everybody has everything afforded to them and will all live to be 190 years old. I don't know if I want
I,
that.
right. Yeah. I mean, I've found it helpful to look at it sort of like the literary concept of the golden age,
Yeah.
like a mystical time where everything was simpler and easier, and we're always attached to this golden age idea, which may be a time in the future it becomes a form of utopianism as well.
Yeah.
But uh, um, it's almost always problematic. I feel like you need to interrogate that, you know, and even
Very much.
the we could do a lot worse than Star Trek future, a moneyless society where we can travel the stars and, you know, it's spread our confederacy across the galaxy, but but there's no one perfect solution, you know,
No.
and um, I think it really does come down to individuals, and what I find troubling is the dehumanization, and I think that's what you see with the witch trials a lot. Is they're not quite human; they're witches, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of overlap back then with witches and vampires and werewolves. A lot of these things, like you read the books of Montague Summers,
Mm.
you find that they overlap. You
Yeah.
know, that speaking of werewolves,
Oh, it is a full moon. So while we're
yeah.
speaking, it is a full moon. So it's, yeah, it
But yeah,
happened.
I mean, whatever can be used to dehumanize people, and that's one thing I just can't countenance at all. You know, that's a hard line in the sand for me. You know, but
And it usually happens no matter what our subjective worldviews are. Like a lot of blame
mhm,
gets put at the feet of religion, and a lot of it gets put at the feet of wide cultural traditions and beliefs. But there's these deep cart ruts that occur within human instinct and human behavior that I think play as much, if not a larger role in this kind of things. But yeah, I can at some point the trite simplified term of walking a mile in somebody else's shoes has to at some point it has to set in. Like it has to just at some point we have to realize that this is bigger than ourselves.
mhm,
And I think I truly believe that one of the vectors for that is opening space for people's experiences, as boring as they might be while they're sitting down, talking to you, is as boring as that person telling you the story of their dream. I wish for a world in which when they do that, everybody's delighted for them. Right.
yeah.
When
Well,
somebody,
holding
yeah,
space for other people, and that's not
yeah,
just for paranormal or magical
no,
things.
no,
Anything that they feel worthy of conveying to you,
yeah,
communicating to you, just hold
yeah,
space for people, you know, and you'd be
100%.
surprised what you learn, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah. Those are the authors and the people that I tend to like. I gravitate towards the people that are the disseminators of other people's stories. I like James Joyce. James Joyce loved listening to people, right? And
yeah,
well, he's not my favorite
that's what
author.
his books are. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. Like he just loved Jeffrey Kripal loves listening to people's stories. All of my favorite people, John Keel, Jacques Vallée, like I said, the other people, just Susan Demeter and all of all of the people, the ones that listen are the ones that I tend to want to listen to.
yeah, yeah, and that's fair. That's a good way to judge people, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we've been going over an hour, I think,
Oh,
but
really? Holy
this has been a really this has been a really fun chat. I suspected that you and I would get along
oh,
well,
definitely.
ideologically and in conversation, and I'm happy to see that I'm not wrong.
No. Wouldn't it be terrible if I turned out to be boring? Oh, imagine like that.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like it can happen. You can invite somebody on that you've never spoken to, and then realize, oh, we just don't connect for some reason.
I will say it's never happened with me. And I'm not just saying that because I know maybe some of my guests. I found everybody. I'm a good judge of character. Everybody that I've had on the show, there wasn't really one where I was like, that didn't go well. I haven't had that.
Yeah,
I've been
I
very
don't think I've quite had that,
oh,
but
okay. Yeah.
there have been times where I'm like, ooh, this isn't as easy as I thought.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah. No,
um, but yeah, I am a big fan of your show. I do really appreciate the work that you put in because you do put in quite a bit of work. Um, not to
it's
mention
it's
that
my
this,
day job. It's literally my day job, and
yeah,
I'm very lucky that this is I make a modest I make enough to live and maybe go on vacation once or twice a year. But other than that, I'm so happy that I'm so happy that I'm this lucky that I get to wake up and work on a podcast about crazy weird stuff
right.
that the rest of the world thinks is dumb, but
Yeah, and aside from your main show, you have a Patreon, which is like a different show entirely, or like a bonus show, basically, because there's almost as much or more material there.
more. Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually I put as much as I love my main podcast, my Patreon is them's the people that keep me alive. So I put as much work, if not more work, into the Patreon stuff, and it's a whole different beast. But yeah, I love both. It's it's a gift that enough people find me as entertaining enough that they feel like supporting me. So yeah, I'm
well, entertaining and informative, because like I said earlier, it's like you do a really good job of elucidating tough concepts to understand and giving enough background and context for people that maybe aren't as familiar to take it in, which is not an easy task. And
no.
so I salute you for doing it as well as you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So your most recent series is the occult books, right? That was what you were talking about most recently on the main show.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yeah. I
and
did a bunch on did 3 books. It was anticipation of this putting all of my I recommend a lot of books. If people listening to your show haven't actually listened to my show, I do a lot of book recommendations through my episode. And so I set up a bookshop through a virtual bookshop through bookshop.org. And kind of as like the reveal for this, I did three episodes on books, and I did one on what are called Cyprianic grimoires, which is a tradition that a lot of folks, even in the West, haven't really heard about, particularly if they're more enamored with like lodge magic or Aleister Crowley. There's the Cyprianic stuff doesn't really get in there, but there's a whole tradition across Europe of this sorcerer saint called Saint Cyprian. Then I did a
right,
series on blue grimoires, which were French books, cheap little paperback books that people would just keep on them as like magical talismans almost, but there was real magic in some of those books. It's kind of incredible. And then I finished off with talking to the modern cunning man, talking about books of magic that people or grimoires that people actually we have their notes and marginalia, and they've talked about working through what they're working about. Yeah, I had a great time. I love talking about books. I love books. It's kind of, in my opinion, books are for the most part a huge part of the Western magical tradition, and more so than people believe. And so yeah, I had a great deal of fun with that. And then the last episode I did was about ghosts, because again, that's how I kind of got here. Just loved the
Yeah.
spook stuff. Egon Spengler, it's his fault. It's Egon's fault. I was
Yeah.
actually
And
Ray was my favorite always. Like Dan Aykroyd as Ray, because he got the occult bookstore, didn't he? Right, like
right. Yeah.
Ray's occult books. Ray was always my favorite. His enthusiasm, I think, just he loves this stuff, right?
Oh, right. And Aykroyd in real life is a spiritualist or comes from a spiritualist family. So yeah. Yep.
I had a chance to talk to and actually personally thank Dan Aykroyd once upon a time, and it's about 7 years ago. And that was awesome to actually just say thank you for Ghostbusters and for your work and everything. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it was really cool to actually meet him.
Oh, that'd be great if you could have him on your show.
Ah,
Let's see about that.
we'll see. We'll see. I know he went on last podcast on the left. He made an appearance there at some point, but we'll see.
Yeah.
He's doing a TV series. He's kind of like doing his version of Unsolved Mysteries, isn't he?
I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
haven't
haven't.
seen it yet though. Yeah. Yep.
TV, what's this?
Yeah. All right. So what's coming up for you at the show? Do you have any preview of stuff or
The podcast, I've got an episode that I can't, things are happening, things are boiling,
okay.
but I can't announce too much right now. But there will be an episode towards the end of the year that will explain everything that's happening. Slight changes to the podcast. Don't worry, I'm not going away. Still going to be podcasting again. This is my life. This is so far my career. It beats the other one I had, and so podcast is not going away. Just changes. I'm going to be making a statement about that. Yeah, towards Christmas 2024. But other than that, just maintaining cruising altitude for the main podcast. Still doing the Patreon stuff, and then yeah, 2025 is going to be different but good.
Yeah.
I promise. I promise everybody.
Okay. Well, good. I'll look forward to it either way because I have enjoyed the show so far. So
Thank you so much. I
um,
always appreciate it. And I also appreciate when you talk about it on the social medias and you're always like, oh, this episode was great. I really do appreciate spreading the word.
well,
It's
yeah. I mean, I think that's what we all really need to do is support each
right.
other and promote each other and give each other big ups when we see it. Because I feel
I
like sometimes people feel awkward about it. They don't really want to like make a comment publicly and
do.
share something,
Everybody
but do
do.
it. Just do it because
Yeah.
no matter how big the creator is that you're dealing with, people love to hear that their work is. You don't know that that person could be sitting there sad that nobody ever says, "Hey, good job" to them.
It was one of those things where before I did it, before I was in any kind of public facing occupation or anything, it really does make a difference. If you enjoy somebody's art, say so. Say so.
Yeah.
Put it on writing somewhere. As ethereal as the internet is, and that's what you think, like, well, if I put this comment down, nobody's going to read it. Just put it down. Truly, like that, it does help support the people whose works you enjoy. It's
You
very,
could literally save someone's life doing that.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
no exaggeration. So, um, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you,
This has
AP.
been
This has been amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon.
Take care. Take care, everyone.